Bonjour, I'm Andrew Pryor, and this is Fabulously Delicious, the French food podcast, the original podcast for French food in English. As a MasterChef Australia alum, French food author, and long-time France-based food obsessive, I share the stories behind the dishes, chefs, and traditions that make cuisine in France so irresistible. We'll talk about flavour, culture, and also a little bit of culinary history. In today's episode of Fabulously Delicious, we're diving into the buttery, flaky world of the croissant, tracing its journey from Austrian origins to the beloved place in French boulangeries. The croissant, golden, buttery, and impossibly flaky. It's one of the world's most beloved pastries, instantly recognisable and utterly irresistible. It's a staple of French breakfasts and cafes worldwide. But behind those delicate layers lies a fascinating history, one shaped by centuries of culinary innovation, cross-cultured influences, and a journey that stretches far beyond the streets of Paris. Croissants are a type of pastry that made from laminated dough, where the layers of butter and dough are folded together to create its signature flaky, airy texture. Golden on the outside, soft and buttery on the inside. Croissants can be enjoyed plain or filled with chocolate, almond cream, or even savoury ingredients. More than just a pastry, it's a perfect example of French baking craftsmanship, combining simple ingredients with meticulous technique to create something irresistible. Believe it or not, the story of the croissant doesn't actually start in France at all. It begins in Central Europe with a pastry called the Austrian Kipfer. Shaped in the now iconic crescent, the Kipfer has been around since at least the 13th century, and some sources hint it may be even older. Unlike the delicate buttery croissants we know today, Kipfer come in all sorts of shapes and flavours. They're sweet, they're savoury, filled or plain, and were often dense, more bread-like. It was a humble pastry, but one that would lay the foundation for one of the world's most beloved treats. The crescent shape of the kipfer wasn't chosen by chance. It carried deep symbolic meaning that resonated across cultures. One of the most famous legends ties the pastry to the siege of Vienna in 1683, when the city successfully defended itself against the Ottoman Turks. According to the story, bakers working late into the night were the first to hear the Turks tunneling beneath the city walls. In celebration of Vienna's dramatic victory, they baked pastries shaped like the crescent moon, a symbol found on the Ottoman flag. The crescent shape, therefore, wasn't just decorative, it was a culinary tribute to a historic moment. A way for bakers to mark triumph through food. Now, whilst historians debate the exact accuracy of this story, it demonstrates how food symbolism and culture were entwined long before the croissant became a French icon. Beyond symbolism, the kipfer itself was versatile and deeply embedded in Central European baking traditions. These early pastries came in many forms: dense, bread-like, sweet, savoury, or filled with nuts, honey, or dried fruit. They were practical as well as symbolic, made to be nourishing and long-lasting, and they reflected the creativity of medieval bakers who adapted recipes to local ingredients and tastes. The kiffer's design and functionality set the stage for centuries of evolution, establishing a template that would later inspire French bakers to refine and transform it into the delicate buttery croissant that we all know today. Another Viennese legend adds further intrigue to the story of the crescent. Following the battle, soldiers and officers were rewarded for their courage. Among them, a Polish soldier, spy and diplomat, also a merchant, would later become famous as the founder of Vienna's first café, The Blonde Vache, at the Blue Bottle. During the Ottoman retreat, this baker discovered hundreds of sacks of coffee beans previously unknown in Europe. Curious, he had the beans ground and tried serving the coffee to Viennese patrons, but it initially failed and didn't really catch on. There was no Instagram then. Undeterred, he found a clever solution. He paired the coffee with a pastry, specifically one shaped like the Turkish croissants. This combination proved more appealing to the Viennese and helped popularize coffee drinking in the city. Even if some details of the legends are romanticized, it reinforces the connection between the crescent shape, Viennese culture, and the emergence of a pastry tradition that would eventually travel westward. The croissant's journey to France is closely tied to the cultural exchange in the 18th century, a time when French and Austrian culinary worlds intersected through diplomacy, marriage, and aristocratic taste. One of the most famous figures associated with this transition is Marie Antoinette, the Austrian princess who married Louis XVI in 1770. Popular lore often credits her with bringing Austrian pastries, including the Kefler, to the French court, introducing French bakers to new ideas about shape, dough, and flavor. Whilst historians caution that there is no concrete evidence she personally invented or requested croissants, her influence on French pastry culture was significant. Marie Antoinette's personal love of Austrian pastries went beyond simple curiosity. She is said to have brought her own Austrian chef with her to Versailles, someone who was familiar with the pastries of her homeland and could recreate them for the royal court. The Queen's taste for these pastries helped elevate them from a regional curiosity to a coveted delicacy amongst French aristocrats. This influence sparked experimentation among French bakers, who began combining Austrian techniques with French ingredients, more butter, and refined leavening methods. Over time, these innovations laid the groundwork for the modern croissant, transforming it from a dense Viennese bread into the light, flaky, buttery masterpiece that has become an enduring symbol of French baking today. The term viennoiserie comes from the French word for Viennese, reflecting the Austrian origins of these pastries. It refers to a category of baked goods that sits somewhere between bread and pastry, often made with yeasted dough enriched with butter, sugar, eggs, or milk. Unlike ordinary bread, viennoiseries are sweet or indulgent, but unlike traditional pastries like puff pastry tarts, they usually involve some form of leavening that gives them a soft, airy interior. The term itself began to appear in French baking vocabulary in the 19th century as Parisian bakers adapted Austrian styles and techniques, particularly those introduced by August Zang and other Viennese bakers to French tastes. Viennoiseries quickly became associated with the luxury and craftsmanship of French boulangeries, prized for their golden crusts, delicate textures, and rich flavors. A wide variety of pastries fall under the category of viennoiseries. The most famous example is, of course, the croissant, along with other laminated delights like the pain au chocolat, the pain au raisin, and croissant au amande. Other examples include the brioche with its rich buttery dough, chouquettes, which are light puffs sprinkled with sugar pearls, and pan suite or Danish-style pastries, which often feature fruit or custard fillings. While each viennoiserie has its own shape, flavor, and method, what unites them is the combination of yeast-leavened dough with rich buttery or sweet ingredients, creating pastries that are indulgent yet versatile enough to be enjoyed at breakfast, brunch, or as a snack. Essentially, viennoiseries represent the French reinterpretation of Austrian baking techniques, elevating simple bread into something luxurious, flaky, and irresistible. A quick pause. Want even more French deliciousness? Well, then you can join my fabulously delicious Substack, where I share exclusive food finds, restaurant tips, behind the scenes podcast extras, and very French stories you won't hear here on the show. You can subscribe for free or go paid to unlock extra indulgence and help support this podcast. Merci beaucoup. Find the link in the show notes for this episode or visit andrewpryorfabulously.com. If this podcast brings a little French joy into your life, you can support it directly via the link in the show notes for this episode. Your contribution helps keep Fabulously Delicious independent and fuels future episodes, food adventures, and delicious research, of course. Merci infiniment. Your support means the world. The term croissant first appears in French texts in the 19th century. It literally means crescent in French, a nod to the pastry's distinctive shape. By this time, the croissant was beginning to transform from the denser bread-like Austrian Kipfer into something lighter and more delicate. French bakers were experimenting with leavened dough, incorporating more butter and adjusting baking techniques to achieve, well, a finer texture and a richer flavour. These experiments marked a turning point as what had once began at being a hearty, simple pastry began evolving into a more elegant, refined treat that could rival the best of French patisserie. The croissant was gradually shedding its heavy Austrian roots whilst embracing the French flair for culinary sophistication, laying the foundation for the pastry we recognise today. But the heart of this modern croissant is laminated dough, technically known as pâte fouette laine. This meticulous technique involves repeatedly folding butter into the dough, creating dozens of alternative layers of fat and dough. When baked, the water in the butter heats and turns to steam, forcing the layers apart and producing the light, airy, and flaky texture that defines the croissant. The process requires skill and precision. Too little folding and the layers won't separate properly. Too much, and the butter can melt into the dough. The result, when done correctly, is a pastry that is golden and crisp on the outside, soft and buttery on the inside, and practically melts in your mouth. A perfect combination of craftsmanship, chemistry, and centuries of culinary innovation. Laminated dough was a revolutionary development for French bakers, transforming not just the croissant, but an entire category of pastries. This method allows for creative variations. Pain au chocolat, almond croissants, and other filled or flavored viennoiseries all rely on the same technique. By mastering laminated dough, bakers were able to take a simple crescent-shaped pastry and elevate it to a level of artistry that could be celebrated both in cafes and at the royal table. It also illustrates the French knack for refinement, taking something practical like a yeasted dough and turning it into an indulgent, luxurious experience. A key figure in the croissant's transformation was August Zang, an Austrian entrepreneur who arrived in Paris in the 1830s. Zang opened the Viennese bakery, boulangerie Viennoise, and introduced Parisians not only to Viennese pastries like the Kipfer Viennese, but also to a new way of baking. Zang brought with him an Austrian steam oven, which was revolutionary for Parisian bakers at the time. Unlike French ovens, which often produced uneven heat, Zhang's oven allowed for more consistent baking and better crust formation, making pastries flakier, more evenly browned, and buttery. The technological innovation, combined with the richness of the Austrian-style pastries, created a sensation among Parisians and quickly set his bakery apart from anything they had ever experienced before. French bakers were inspired not only by Zhang's pastries, but by the technique and tools he introduced. They began experimenting with their own recipes and adapting the baking methods he brought from Austria. The introduction of the steam oven helped them achieve the delicate, airy layers that would become the hallmark of the modern croissant. In this way, Zhang's influence went far beyond recipes. He helped refine what was possible in French baking. By the late 19th century, the croissant had evolved into the buttery, flaky pastry that we all know and love today, and became a staple of Parisian bakeries, thanks in large part to Zhang's bakery techniques and in transformative power of his oven. By the late 19th century, croissants had become a familiar sight in Parisian boulangeries, no longer exotic novelties, but a beloved part of everyday life. They were served fresh and warm, their golden flaky layers practically melting in the hands of early morning customers, and often enjoyed alongside a steaming cup of coffee or a hot chocolate chaud. In France, the croissant has grown to symbolize much more than a simple pastry. It's an essential part of the petit déjeuner, or French breakfast, celebrated for its simplicity and elegance. Traditionally, it's eaten plain, straight from the oven, sometimes with a pat of butter or a dollop of jam, and accompanied by a café au lait. providing the perfect start to the day. Its delicate texture, rich buttery flavour, and comforting aroma make it a ritual as much as a meal, reflecting the centuries of culinary craft and French love of breakfast as a leisurely, enjoyable experience rather than hurried necessity. Across France, croissants take on subtle regional differences that reflect local taste and baking traditions. In Alsace, for example, croissants are often richer, made with extra butter to create an indulgent melt-in-your-mouth texture. In Brittany, they may be slightly sweeter, or sometimes they're filled with almond paste, highlighting the region's love of nut-based pastries. Even within Paris, different bakeries have their own signature approaches, from the number of laminated layers to the degree of flakiness and browning. These regional variations demonstrate how French bakers embraced the croissant as a versatile canvas, adapting the classic crescent to suit local preferences, ingredients, and culinary heritage. Beyond these regional differences, French bakers also invented a variety of croissant-based pastries that have become iconic in their own right. The pain au chocolat, a rectangular laminated pastry filled with rich chocolate, is one of the most popular, whilst the croissant en marmande features almond cream and sliced almonds, adding sweetness and texture to the buttery layers. Other variations include fruit-filled croissants, ham and cheese croissants, and seasonal creations with flavors like pistachio and even matcha nowadays. Even after the croissant had become a Parisian staple, it continued to evolve. The earliest written recipe for a croissant made with leavened puff pastry appeared in Auguste Colombine's 1906 Nouveau Encyclopédia Culinaire. This version was already crescent-shaped and made with layers of butter and dough, but it was denser and heavier, closer to the early Viennese-style pastries that inspired it. It had the beginnings of the laminated technique, but the texture was not yet that light, airy flakiness we now associate with a perfect croissant. It wasn't until 1915 when French chef Sylvain Claudius Goy published his recipe that the croissant became truly modern. Goy perfected the lamination and leavening process, creating a pastry that was golden, crisp on the outside, delicately airy on the inside. The very same croissant that fills French boulangeries today. The shape of a croissant can also reveal something about how it is made. Traditional French butter croissants are usually shaped straight, which allows the dough to rise evenly and showcase the delicate flaky layers that come from high-quality butter. In contrast, the crescent-shaped croissant, often found in commercial bakeries or mass-produced versions, are frequently made with margarine instead of butter. Margarine behaves differently in lamination, making it easier to shape into a curve without the dough breaking, but it produces a less rich flavor and slightly different texture than a straight buttery croissant. So while both shapes are recognizable as croissants, the straight butter version is generally considered more artisanal, with a superior taste and melt-in-your-mouth quality, whereas the curved margarine version reflects practicality and mass production. From its humble beginnings as a dense Austrian Kipfler to the delicate, buttery croissants that fill French cafes and boulangeries today, the croissant is more than just a pastry. It's a story of history, culture, and culinary ingenuity. Every golden, flaky layer tells a tale of bakers experimenting with dough and butter, of cross-cultural influences, and of centuries of refinement. Whether enjoyed straight from a Parisian oven, filled with chocolate, or sprinkled with almonds, the croissant remains a beloved symbol of French baking. Want more fabulously delicious between episodes? Well, you can follow me at Andrew Pryor Fabulously on Instagram and Threads, and at Fab French Foodie on Blue Sky for bite-sized French food history, delicious facts, behind-the-scenes moments, and plenty of life in France flavor. And if you want to watch the podcast, not just listen, you can find full video episodes on YouTube. More food, more stories, more fabulous. Come join the party. It's très scrollable. Et voila. That's the end of today's episode of Fabulously Delicious. If this episode made you hungry, happy, or suddenly Googling flights to France? Parfait. If you enjoyed it, leave a review. Share it with a fellow food lover and come say bonjour. I always love hearing from you. And if you like this episode on croissants, be sure to check out similar episodes on the dacquoise or puff pastry that I did with Marty Markles by searching for them on the podcast platform that you're using to listen to Fabulously Delicious. There's plenty more deliciousness awaiting. Until next time, eat well, stay curious, and remember, life is better with butter. And as I always say, whatever you do it fabulously. Merci beaucoup, bon app, et à très bientôt.